Without further ado, let's welcome Mark Cohen, who comes to us from Google Cloud Platform. So, stage is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Raise your hand if you can't hear me. That's just a joke. It's a bad joke too. Yeah, so my name's Mark. I'm a software developer, a human software developer. And if you are interested in learning more about what I'm up to, my blog is up here, mco.dev, although I will warn you, I haven't been blogging about software lately. I've been blogging about politics. So just know that if you go there, you're in for a treat. These slides are available at mco.fyi/genai. They're there now, so you don't need to take pictures, although if you want to take a picture of a slide, you're welcome to. I won't complain. Just a little bit of background. So I've been a software developer since 1982. Raise your hand if you were born after 1982. Okay. So I've been doing this for longer than most of you have been alive. I don't mean that in an old guy kind of way. I mean that I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of revolutions in my time. The smartphone, the internet, personal computers. But this one we're in right now feels different. It feels more profound than any I've seen before. So this past year or so, I just kind of went on a journey to build an app using this new stuff, and I wanted to share with you what I learned. How many of you are developers, software developers, by the way? Okay, cool, quite a few. So let me get started. The way this really got started was me playing around with a weekend project. And I have this theory that everything that's great in the world started out as somebody's weekend project, and that's what I'm going to share with you today is my weekend project. That's what I look like whenever I'm about to start a project. Back in 2016, I wrote this document. This is actually a screenshot from an internal Google document about proposing an app called an interactive trivia quiz challenge game. And at the time, it was intended to show off Chrome kind of apps that are sort of like, I'm forgetting the term now, but it's a kind of web app that looks like a native app, progressive web app, that's the term. And it never really went too far because it had trouble sourcing the data. And then we fast forward to last year, we had this huge revolution or explosion in generative AI, and I thought, this idea from 2016, I can actually do it now. Using all this AI stuff. So I created this app called Quizaic. I say it like mosaic because it has AI in the name. How clever. And I'm going to just jump to a demo to give you a sense of how it works. So I can browse quizzes, and I can delete them and edit them and all the stuff you'd expect me to be able to do. I'm going to create a new quiz here. And with any luck, this will work, and we'll be able to actually play it together. I'm going to call it Chatbot. The topic is a free-form text field, which I'm going to say Edinburgh. How many of you are local, folks? Okay, you're going to have a distinct advantage. We'll do 5 questions, and as you see, it's thinking. And the reason it's thinking is because it takes a while to ask a question of a LLM and get it back. And this is one of the problems. It's a little annoying because it's not as fast as these things we're used to doing, like a SQL query of a database or looking up a thing from a file. But I gave a little bit of feedback there to say, we're thinking about it, and then I used AI to generate an image here of Edinburgh. So I'm kind of using 2 different modes of AI. And then I can say, let's host the quiz at runtime, so to speak, I can set certain parameters. I'm just going to take the default. Actually, let's do 15 seconds instead of 30 seconds. I'll say start hosting, and I invite you to grab your phone and scan this QR code if you want to play. Keep our fingers crossed this thing will actually hang together. Okay, Valentina, wherever you are, you were the first person in, so congratulations to you. Kate, welcome. Yannick, okay, I'm not going to stop naming names like the Walmart greeter here because there are many of you. Let me close this because you see I have a UI artifact where the expanded box was scrolling the QR code very bad. But my workaround is I just close that box. We're up to 34 registered players. Let's start the quiz. 35, okay. 38, okay. As soon as we get to 50, we're starting. By the way, this is a 1-hour talk I'm compressing into 20 minutes, so good luck to me. Okay, let's start the quiz. Now, you should all see this question pop up on your phone. You have 15 minutes. What is the name of the famous castle that dominates Edinburgh's skyline? Tough question, eh? And you see my app tells me how many people have responded so far. So 44 of 49. We got another player in the meantime, 45 of 49. I'm going to say that's enough. Let's show the results. And the scores are different because I'm also weighting you based on how quickly you responded to the question. So Dave, you're in first place. Let's go to the second question. Which famous Scottish writer called Edinburgh his home? Now this might be ambiguous, right? It is, right? Because I have a feeling multiple of these are right. My initial thought, not being an Edinburgh expert, is all 4 of these look right. I don't know about Conan Doyle. But Burns, okay, Stevenson I don't think is native to Edinburgh. I know he lived here at some point. And why am I analyzing the question? Okay, show results. 456 is in first place now. Well done. Let's go a little faster and I'll try to keep quieter. What is the name of the annual Arts and Culture Festival held here in Edinburgh? This I know because I love it. Okay, let's see the results. I didn't show the answer here, but I do have a little histogram at the bottom. The Edinburgh Fringe Festival is the right answer. And on the leaderboard, Angus is now in first place. Very well. Well done, Angus. Question 4, which iconic landmark is located on Edinburgh's Royal Mile? That is not, I don't see the thing I expected to see. Let's see what the answer was. Holyrood Palace. This isn't showing us the correct answer, which is a bug. It must show on your phones. What is what's showing? The Tron Kirk. Does that make any sense to anybody? Okay. All right. We're seeing in real time how bad trusting large language models can be. What's the name of the river that flows through Edinburgh? The Tay, the Clyde, the Forth, or the Dee? Okay, let's get this over with. All right, I'm going to show the results. And it looks like Jan came in first. Where is Jan? Round of applause for Jan. Harold second. Where's Harold? Well done. And Masha came in third. Nice job, Masha. Okay, so that's the idea behind my app. And what I like about it, you've seen apps like that before. You've probably played apps like that before. There's one that's really popular. I'm not going to name it, but it's called Kahoot. And what I love about this is that when I've used Kahoot and other trivia quiz apps in the past, you have to actually author the quiz, which is tedious and hard to do really well. And this generates the quiz for you. The quiz wasn't great today, but I'm going to just share with you some of the things I learned in creating that app. So first of all, using these things is surprisingly easy to do hard things, like generate trivia quizzes, right? I mean, it actually wasn't that hard at all to get that part working. What was hard was to do it well, as you've just seen. Google has two versions of the public large language model, Gemini 1.0 and Gemini 1.5. The 1.5 code that I had working a couple of weeks ago wasn't working for me this morning, so I rolled it back to 1.0, and the quiz wasn't very good, and it hasn't been very good with 1.0 for months. With 1.5, previously called Gemini Ultra, it was excellent. It was, I think, as good as some of the top models out there. So I'm a little sad you didn't get to see that, but with the latest models, the quizzes are quite good. It's still hard to do that well reliably, because you still get questions once in a while that are not right, that are ambiguous, that don't have the right answer, and it's really important to have tactics to deal with that and not just have the quiz be low quality. It's really hard to objectively evaluate the output, especially with something like a quiz. It's not just correctness. That's kind of like my top priority is I shouldn't have a quiz where the correct answer, the answer that's supposed to be correct is wrong, or vice versa. But beyond that, there are good questions and bad questions, right? We all kind of have this sense, that's a good question. Now, that's kind of a dumb question, or that's, I think I even said that about one of the questions that's generated. And so how do we actually get the model to generate good questions? The other thing I learned in general is, as I started applying this, I started seeing AI solutions everywhere. Everywhere I looked, I felt I could solve that with an LLM. And that's empowering, but it can also be a problem. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. Let's talk about prompting. So this tweet, maybe some of you have seen it before, from Andrei Karpathy. Not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, but he said the hottest new programming language is English. This was kind of a revelation for me. I mean, I got the basic idea of these LLMs. I created this app, and I went to give a talk about it in Stockholm, I think it was. Yeah. So I was in Stockholm. It's the morning of the talk, and I'm like, everybody in the audience speaks Swedish. And here I am, Mr. American, doing my talk, my quiz, generating my quiz in English. So I brought up the little prompt file, the text I used to prompt the LLM, and I just added in Swedish to the end of the prompt, and it just worked. And this kind of blew my mind. This was when I suddenly realized everything I knew about programming had changed, because I just added a multilingual feature by adding 2 words to a text file. It's really important to manage your prompts just like you do your code, because we have this sense that prompts are just text things we throw around, but now they're part of the infrastructure of your software, and you need to give it the same sort of version control and management approach that you use with everything else. Prompts and code work better together. What do I mean by that? I claim you will be a better LLM whisperer, prompt engineer, whatever term you want to use, if you understand code. Because if you're using the output of that code in a program, you're going to have a better feeling for the overall structure, how it fits into your application, how to do things better, faster, more reliably, and so on. So I really think it's important to learn how to program in English, but I also think it's important to continue to understand how to program in programming languages. Just like in everything else in computer science, it's really important to measure everything. So we have to be monitoring the LLM output quality, and we have to have a way of assessing the quality. How do we do that? One of the ways is we establish a benchmark that we can use to say how good is the output of this LLM. Okay, so that takes us to validation. How do we validate a quiz generated by this model? Now, my idea is use the LLM to assess the quality of the LLM output. And when I say that, most people laugh. Because, really, Mark? That's like asking a student to grade their own exam, right? Like, if it's lying, how do I know it's not lying when it's telling me how good its output is? Well, I have a corpus of questions that I have found on the internet, trivia questions that are human curated, so they're known good questions by and large, and the answers are known. So what I do is I take a question from that data set, and here's an example: who was the first US president? And I decompose it into these 4 assertions, where 3 of them are known to be false, and 1 of them is known to be true. So you can just think of any multiple choice question with 4 responses contains 1 truth and 3 lies, effectively, right? So I take that and I run it through an LLM, and I say, in one and only one word, which of the following are the following assertions true or false? And the LLM says, like this, false, false, true, false, and I can batch those up and do a whole bunch of them at a time. And it turns out that these models are actually pretty good at figuring out what's true and what's false. So GPT-4 scored about 90%. Google's Gemini Pro, the 1.0 version that I told you I kind of reverted back to, scored only about the low 70s. Gemini Ultra, Google's 1.5 newest model, is in the 90+ percentile range. And what's interesting to me is I know these statements, whether they're true or false. And so if the model tells me this is false and I know it's true, I can definitively say this model made a mistake. Now, using Bayes' theorem, I can, if I understand the probability that a given model generates a good question, like let's say it's on the order of 80%, just for argument's sake. These curves represent the probability that if an answer is correct, the model will tell me so. And I can measure those. And right now, the best models out there are following this yellow curve. They're 90% accurate, as I mentioned. And what that means is, by applying Bayes' theorem, if the actual community of quizzes is 80% accurate, you look at this yellow line, it's actually in the 95th percentile, that if the test says it's accurate, it actually is. Okay? So what that means is I have a tool that I can run these questions through. If the test says, I don't think this is accurate, all bets are off. But if the test says this is accurate, I can be very sure it is accurate. And so what this gives me is a mechanism by which I can generate quizzes, and then I can validate them in real time. And I can say, what do you think of this quiz I just generated? And with the results, I can flag it with a color code or something. You know, like red means don't trust this quiz, yellow means probably it's okay, green means looks like a really solid, good quality quiz. I haven't implemented this yet in real time. I've only done like batch tests on quiz data, but I think it's a really nice idea because it takes us away from this model throws me something and I just put it out to the user and say, here's a quiz, enjoy it, to I can actually definitively, or I shouldn't say definitively, probabilistically, statistically say, this is very likely, this has a 95% probability that this is a good quiz, or this is an 80% probability. So it gets me away from the fuzzy world of language models back to something I can measure. Just want to see how I'm doing on time. Okay, 5 minutes. Code defensively, because these models are non-deterministic, anything that comes back could any day at any time blow up on you. Just as an example, I generate these quizzes and I ask for them back in JSON format. And every once in a while, the JSON comes back a little weird. And so I have to run it through a JSON parser and in real time say, is this legal JSON? So you have to get to this mode where you don't trust the code. You don't trust the model. You have to kind of assume the worst at all times. Run quizzes through a formatter, I talked about that. If the quiz actually fails, it's possible I ask for a quiz and it just fails. So I've seen that happen. I have to be ready for that. I have to retry it, I have to keep the user informed, and I have to log an event so that I can keep track of when that's happening. Performance, as I mentioned earlier when I was generating that quiz and you had the progress indicator, these things are slow. They do amazing things, but they take a little while. And I like to think of it as we're living in the 2400 baud period of AI. And because I know all your ages, I know that most of you won't have any idea what I'm talking about in 2400 with 2400 baud. Back in the day, before the internet, we had these things called modems, and they let you connect to a far end, a service, and they were really slow. And we all lived with them because the stuff we got was amazing. And that's where we are now. It's way, way, way too slow. But it's going to get better because we're just at the beginning of this period. Slow predictions, bad user experience. We have all these tricks we've been using for the last decades, like doing things asynchronously, which I just showed you an example of, caching results wherever possible, parallel processing, batching, and so on. We can still use all those tricks. They still help, and it's going to get better over time. Another thing to think about is don't overuse the hammer. For example, there's a version of this app where you can do free-form answers. So instead of like multiple choice, I say, you know, who was the first president, and you type in Washington. And I was dealing with how to grade these free-form answers because they could be any text string at all. And there's 5 different ways you could say Washington or George W. or President Washington or whatever. And I was starting to build an LLM thing where I would run the answer through it, and I realized this is too much. There's this thing called fuzzy text matching, and a friend of mine pointed me to a Python library that does this, and it works great, and it's good enough. So not every problem requires Genai or ML, and just be cognizant that when you do take that on, you're taking on some risks and some different challenges than you've probably had before. So in summary, this dream of mine to build this amazing quiz app, which I never got around to for 7 years, I suddenly was able to implement in 7 weeks. And the answer is really twofold. One is the AI revolution kind of changed a lot about what we can accomplish. But the other thing is I came upon a kind of a power toolkit. And this may seem like a commercial. It's not really intended to be, but I love these tools. Cloud Run is a Google service that lets you take a bunch of code, put it into a Docker container, and just run it whenever incoming requests come in. That's the serving part of my application. Vertex AI is how I'm using Google's Gemini model, so that's a big part of it. Cloud Firestore is the database. That's where I'm storing everything. So the quizzes, the information about the users, the results. And you notice that like there was a lot of interactivity in the app. Like as soon as I clicked to the next question, your phones showed the next question and all that stuff. And a lot of that was done with a combination of Firestore and Firebase. And finally, the whole UI was done with something called Flutter, which I'm relatively new at, but I really like it a lot. And in 10 seconds, what I think is great about Flutter is it reaches that kind of nirvana where you write one implementation of your code. You have one code base, and you can use it to generate a web app, a mobile app for iOS, for Android. You can even generate a desktop app, all from the same code base. Now, it's not perfect, and you pay something for that, but it gives you a really nice way of building apps that are cross-platform. So that's another reason why I felt like I got a lot done with this app faster than I remember getting things done before. I even came up with this cheesy acronym, RIFF, I call it, because I like playing guitar. That's all I have for you. I'm happy to, am I good on time? Happy to take a question or two?
Yeah,
or?
We have time for maybe a couple questions.
Okay.
Maybe
cool.
2 questions.
Thank you.
Anyone have a question?
Sorry, thank you. So I'm a computer scientist, so this is really exciting, and I'm sort of familiar with this. But I have a question, which is the last slide on your unused slides, if you don't mind. So a philosophical question. So in there, you mentioned Tim Berners-Lee's, yeah? So obviously, we know that he brought about the World Wide Web. So if you were to talk to Tim Berners-Lee about, where we've come in the last 3 decades, 4 decades, what would you say, having worked for Google, having seen so much phenomenal technology advancements, what would you say? I'd be really interested to know.
So if So you saw my slide about how Tim Berners-Lee says this is for everyone. And what would I say to Tim Berners-Lee about what's happening? I would say thank you, because I personally believe the World Wide Web is a paragon of goodness in the world. Now, it's full of horrible, evil things, right? So it's content-wise, it's not a perfect thing by any means. But what I love about it, it's a system that was designed so that anyone can use it, right? Like if I want to build a mobile app, Apple or Google have to give me permission to publish it, and they'll figure out ways to tell me something I've done is not right or whatever. Nobody is a gatekeeper on the web. I can publish anything I want. It's a double-edged sword. But that's a great capability, and I love open systems. I love systems that empower people and give them the opportunity to create and share information. And so that's why I put the Tim Berners-Lee slide in the talk. And I would just, what would I say to him? I would just say, thank you for building something that really is wonderful and has inspired me and many other people. I'll say one more thing about it. It's not really addressing your question, but since you brought up Tim Berners-Lee, I don't know how many people know this, but when Tim Berners-Lee wrote his original research paper on the World Wide Web, he submitted it to a conference. This is like 1994, something like that. And his paper got rejected. And they told him it wasn't novel enough because it didn't have bidirectional hyperlinks. It had only one-way hyperlinks. So it just wasn't good enough. And what I love about that story is that this was like Gutenberg's printing press. This was going to change the world, and yet the powers that be decided it wasn't good enough to even include in some regional conference. And so to me that says, don't always listen to the people in charge because they don't always know what they're talking about, and don't give up. If you have a vision and you have a dream, go for it. Long-winded answer, okay.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Thank you, Mary. It was very insightful, also for people not related to so close to code. So thank you for that. It was very interesting for me to your slide about the validation filter, right? And I am wondering, does that bring it up, like, to reduce the hallucinations or the reliability of the model 100%? Or perhaps including more validation layers would also help reduce this reliability factor?
Yeah, I think you need validation everywhere. You need like real-time validation, and then I think you want to have different levels of validation. You could imagine a slower validation. Like, just to give an example, so the correctness test, you might want to run interactively and in real time. So right away you know, is this lying? But the quality test, like, is this a good quiz question? You might not want to pay for the round trip to do that, because now you're hitting the engine twice and each one's taking whatever it is, 5 or 10 seconds. So then you might want to do the quality tests in the background on a batch basis. Like, here's 10 quizzes, rate the quality of each one from 1 to 10. Something along those lines. But yeah, in some ways I feel like all this validation and verification is the price of having this superpower where you can just ask it to do anything and it does something for you. You can't always trust it, so now you have to do a whole lot more work than you would have had in the past model of programming to make sure you really believe it's useful and good quality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. One more applause for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.